Hello everyone, this is Mr. Combs, and for our last week of studying fiction, I want to talk about theme. Let's consider the following story, and this is one of the fables of Aesop. If you've heard of Aesop's fables, this is one of them. A hungry wolf was lurking near a flock of sheep, but the vigilant shepherd gave him no opportunity to satisfy his appetite. One day the wolf came across a discarded sheepskin. He clothed himself in the skin and was able to hide among the sheep. This disguise fooled the shepherd completely, and that night the wolf was herded into the fold with the sheep. However, this happened to be the night that the shepherd chose one of the sheep to feed his hungry family. Reaching into the pen, the shepherd randomly picked out the disguised wolf and cut his throat. What is this story about? Let's list some one-word answers to this question, and let's not be literal and say sheep or shepherd or a wolf, right? We know it's about those things. But let's focus on some concepts. You may want to pause the video, and if you have a scrap sheet or if you have your notebook out or your notes, you may want to jot some things that this story is about down. Okay, so if you have paused the video and written some concepts this story is about, let's continue. Here are some possible answers that I came up with. So I think the story is about diligence, right? The wolf was lurking near the flock of sheep and would try and try again, right? To get into the where the sheep are. The shepherd was very vigilant, right? So this is about diligence. It's also about it's also about disguise. It's also about survival, right? The wolf is trying to survive. The shepherd wants to survive. He needs to feed his family. That's why he raises sheep. That's why he chooses one to kill, right? The wolf he has to eat to sustain himself. Irony, it's very ironic that the wolf wanted to get a meal, but he becomes the meal. Hunger, it's about the things that we'll do when we're hungry, right? Deception, the wolf tried to deceive the shepherd, right? So this story is about all of those things. We call these subjects of the story. So we're not at theme yet, we're at a subject of the story. Now we will choose one of the subjects to focus on. So let's focus on deception. Is that okay? Let's answer a second question. What does the story say about deception? There can be several different answers to this question. So pause the video maybe and think about what you think this story says about deception. Okay, so I hope that you have come up with one or two statements that you think the story says about deception. And if you wanted to, you could have chosen any of the other subjects of the story that we listed, or any subject that you listed. But one possible answer to the question, what does the story say about deception, is deception leads to vulnerability. If the wolf was not attempting to deceive the shepherd with his disguise, he wouldn't have been one of the possible choices for the shepherd's supper, right? So deception often leads to vulnerability. This statement is a theme of the story. So when you take a subject and you identify what the story is saying about that subject, you have come up with a theme of the story. Daniel and Saphir state the theme of a work of fiction is its controlling idea, the central insight the story gives us about human life. They go on to say a theme is not necessarily an idea that a writer consciously decides to focus on before beginning a story. Writers do not, as a rule, tell a story to illustrate a particular idea. Rather, they try to write truthfully about life, and their particular way of looking at people and events gives their stories a central focus. So writers just want to write about life, right? They want to write um, about their experiences to connect with other human beings. Um, they may want to write a good story, right? To sell, to make money. But their particular way of looking at the world causes certain messages to come out in their writing. And sometimes writers do want to sit down and illustrate a certain message. But most often writers just want to write truthfully about life. As you investigate works of fiction to determine a possible theme, you can begin by asking the two questions we asked earlier about Aesop's fable, to first determine a subject and then to determine what the author is saying about that subject. So ask, what is this story about, to determine a possible subject. Then ask, what does this story say about blank, that subject, to determine one of the story's themes. This seems so simple. However, that first question, what is this story about, can be a difficult question to answer. You shouldn't expect the subject or the theme of a work to jump out at you every time. Some works, in fact most of them, are complex and take a couple of readings and a lot of thinking to sort out the theme. Here are some other questions that can help you, the reader, determine what a work of fiction is ultimately about. So, one of the reasons why we have discussions in this class is so that we can continue to investigate stories that we read, so that we can determine and have a better understanding of what those stories are about. So let's look at these questions. What words, images, or scenes are repeated throughout the story? Sometimes these can lead to generalizations, which can in turn lead to possible themes. Who is the main character? What happens to this character? Does he or she undergo a change? Should the reader identify with this character? Does the author explicitly state any generalizations about the human condition? Do any characters make such statements? What are the main conflicts? How are they resolved? Who wins and why? And what focus does the title of the story provide? Are there any passages in the story where the title is invoked? These passages are important and can lead to a possible theme. As you are determining themes for the stories this week, and indeed for any of the stories that we've looked at, here are some things to keep in mind as you construct statements of theme. A statement of theme is never just one word. It is a subject plus a comment on that subject. Harman and Holman point out that theme implies a subject and a predicate of some kind, not just vice in general, but some such proposition as vice seems more interesting than virtue, but turns out to be destructive. The theme of a work is not a moral. Statements of themes should not begin, people should or you should not. Themes do not teach, they reveal truths. A statement of theme would not be, one should not try to escape death. That's not a good statement of theme. That's telling a person what that person should or should not do. That's a moral, right? A better statement of theme would be, attempting to escape death can lead one to it more quickly. The first statement was a moral, like I said. It tries to teach a lesson. The second statement simply reveals it is a theme. There is no one correct way to state the theme of a work of fiction. Furthermore, literary works can encompass several themes. In fact, no statement of theme that can be backed up with evidence from the work is wrong. Also, a reader doesn't have to agree with the sentiment of a theme to be able to see it in a work. So if you think the author is trying to say something or trying to say this message, but it's something you don't agree with, that's totally fine. Just because you list a theme doesn't mean that it's something you agree with. It's perfectly acceptable to say, for example, I think the author of this work is saying that war is justified in some cases, but I just don't agree. A statement of theme should be universal and go beyond the story itself. For example, a theme of The Lion King is not Simba had to go back and help his family. That's not a good statement of theme. A better statement would be duty is sometimes greater than personal interests. The statement duty is greater than personal interests, that certainly applies to The Lion King, right? Instead of hanging out in the forest all the time, eating bugs and having a great time, Simba had to go back and face his duty as the rightful king, right? But that not only applies to the Lion King, it applies to other situations in life as well.